Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. So lovely to see you all. We'll just wait a few moments while everyone piles on in.
Yeah.
Welcome. If you're able to join us with your camera on, we absolutely love that. It's so lovely to see your faces. And if you can't, of course, we understand. Sometimes it may not be possible, but it is lovely if we can see you. I am so delighted to welcome again Nischala Joy Devi to our space. Nischala is a true yogini in every sense of the word. She has lived a life of dedicated service and continues to do so, and is also someone who I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, personally, I have really looked to for an anchor in the scriptures that resonates for me. You know, I've spent a lot of my life studying Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, many of the other yogic scriptures, and I'm often challenged by the fact that they don't feel like they have been translated or interpreted in such a way that offers relevance for my life as a Westerner and as a woman. And when I discovered Nischala's work, which was through her book, The Secret Power of Yoga, which is a translation of the Yoga Sutra, I just instantly felt like, literally, actually what I felt was, thank God someone has written this book. That's what I felt. It was like, oh my goodness, this exists. Hallelujah. And since then, I have been a firm devotee of Nischala's work, and was so delighted earlier this year when she and Kamala Rose, her esteemed colleague, released a new podcast which specifically looks at Bhagavad Gita, and an interpretation or a investigation, let's say, of the Gita through the lens of the feminine. And so that is why we are meeting today to discuss this beautiful scripture, this great text. Now, many of you are familiar with Bhagavad Gita and have even done some trainings around the scripture with me, and some of you may not be. And what we're not going to do today, because we only have, an hour, is we're not going to kind of give the synopsis or the rundown of what Bhagavad Gita is about. There are many other trainings that do that, and I have offerings that you can engage with that will give you that sort of background context and the understanding of the Gita. We're going to jump in today, I guess you could say, with a little bit of assumed knowledge, like a sense of hoping that you have dipped your toe in at least to the Gita and the teachings of the Gita, and specifically talk about it and think about it in the context of women's teachings. So that's where we're at. That's our plan for the next hour. And with all of that said, I'll just welcome Nischala to the space. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Also, I just wanted to add there, if they want to know the history, they can listen to the podcast too, because we do go into the history of the Gita and the Mahabharata, both. So,
yeah. And the link for the podcast, actually, everyone who's here has already had that link sent out to them. So if you look in your emails, you will find that link. You've already received it. And I will also include it in the notes below the recording of this session for those of you listening to the recording. So that's very available, and
available.
It does give a great context. So I'd love to also allow some time at the end for your questions, but before we go into that, I have a veritable list of my own questions. I'm very excited to pick Nischala's brain. So if everyone is okay with it, we'll just dive right in. And I'm going to start with a question that I feel is particularly potent, particularly given the climate in which we're recording this, which is, the war is still continuing in Palestine. The genocide is still occurring there. There is so much heartbreak on the planet at this time. We've just seen an election in the United States, which had an outcome that I personally am very saddened by. And so one of the messages in the podcast and in your teachings, Nischala, is around the essence of yoga being about bringing a sense of caring into the world. And the Gita has a message of care, which I believe, and which you have spoken to, women as seeing in a unique way. Like it feels like women see through the lens of care in a way that is different to the masculine, let's say. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about this to start us off.
Sure. First of all, thank you for letting me be here. Anytime I can talk to anyone, but especially women, about this, I think we can't take naps even now. I think the time has come for us to be awake. We need to be vigilant. We need to understand that things are not changing like we would like to. And I'm sorry to say this, but I really think that some of the problem comes from these scriptures, that they were written at a time where women had no say. If we think we have nothing now, Is that feedback or what?
Yeah, that was just a little bit of feedback. I'll just ask everyone,
Make
please
sure everybody's
stay on
muted.
mute. Yeah, and
make
I'll
sure
try to
everybody's
stay on
muted.
top of that too.
Yeah. So I think that we have to go back to the essence of this, that was the moral and ethical teachings of the time, right? It's whether it's Christianity, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever it is, these were the books that were depended upon to give us the moral teachings. When that is based on violence and war, we have to really look, how did that play forward? And are we really in a position, especially now, to condone violence? I don't think so. And I think women, especially because they are deemed by nature as the nurturer, we don't really have a choice when something comes out of our body that's helpless, and we have to take care of it. And it's not just the women who have just only given birth. I think we all feel that. You see something helpless, something in need. The whole nursing profession used to be only women. And nurse, the word nurse came from nurturer. So this is what we are. This is who we are. And then to bring in the idea of killing, I think it's really juxtaposition to who we are. And it makes us seek other ways that are not natural to us. And I think this is why we're being caused with a lot of issues and diseases, etc. We have to stop the perpetuation of violence, as far as I see it. And that's why we chose to do the Bhagavad Gita, to talk about the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita has probably one of the most extraordinary gems of spiritual wisdom in it. But it's a little bit like a brooch that your grandmother gave you. The stones may be beautiful, but the setting may be very out of date. So what we do is we take the stones and we reset them. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the Bhagavad Gita. We're not trying to change it. We're just trying to explain how these teachings can come across without being embedded in war. Because for me personally, I don't think any good ever comes out of war. Everybody suffers in war. Both sides suffer, and mostly innocent people. That's who suffers in this. Women, children, etc., who all they want is some peace and enough to feed their children and take care of their children. So I think this is a very complicated question. It's not simplistic that you can just say, oh, it's good or it's bad. But if we don't really change these scriptures, society is going to have a harder time changing, because we depend on them. We believe them. I was just giving a talk the other day, and I remembered as a little girl, 6, 7 years old, something like that. They read in school the Bible, and it was the story of King Solomon cutting the baby in half. Well, I was beside myself. I couldn't wait to get home and ask my mother if this was true. I I couldn't believe that a great king would consider cutting a baby in half. Now, this is what sticks in the mind of a 6 and 7-year-old. So if we're constantly telling them war, 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 this is a righteous war, I don't think righteous and war can ever go in the same sentence. That's how I feel about it. There's no ability for that. We have to pull back and look and see what else is happening. Is there another way? And for thousands of years, there hasn't been. I think it's time to find another way.
I'm always so struck by your bravery, because you're putting yourself up against academics and scholars and men who have interpreted Bhagavad Gita, but many other scriptures too, including Yoga Sutra, in a very, I'm going to say, dogmatic way. You know, it's like the letter of the law, and there's sort of like a right and a wrong, and it's quite polarized. Yeah. And then you come along and you're such a breath of fresh air, because you're willing to be very open-minded and come at it from a place of spirit rather than dogma. And I feel like I've asked you this question before, but I'll probably keep asking it because it's so interesting to me. Like that the courage to do that, the courage to look at the scriptures and take them as your own, and really be willing to grapple and not be dictated to. Can you tell us a little bit? Because I feel like for many of the women here and those listening to the replay too, there'll be a feeling of being a little bit intimidated by scripture. You know, it's like there's a feeling of being a bit intimidated, and it feels like you've really overcome that. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Thank you for the compliment. You know, it's not something that I just thought about, but I think it goes back to what I said before. I'm not fighting. I'm just doing what I think is right. And if people don't like it, which there's plenty of people that don't like it, I'm okay with that. I'm really okay with that, because I think the important thing is we have to express who we really are. If not, it hurts us. It hurts us physically, it hurts us mentally, and it's certainly hurting us socially. If we don't come forward and say this, it just a very interesting thing just happened. I just put out a letter to my mailing list about what happened with the election, because most people in the United States and around the world are rightly devastated by what happened. And so I felt to reach out and just say a few calming words. I just got 2 very nasty responses. And I thought to myself, they took the time to read it and send a nasty response. Instead, take the time to read it and just hold it for a moment and say, what's happening here? What is happening to my country? What is happening to the world? And is there any way? Why are they going after women now? Why are they continually going after us? We must have some power that they're afraid of, because it's been constantly. We see women being covered head to toe. We see women not being able to do this, not being able to do that. What is happening? So my bravery, as you call it, is to me more of a necessity. Someone has to speak up. I have a certain amount of knowledge. I have a certain amount of spiritual bank account, if you would say, from all the years of sadhana. So I feel that there's a power behind me, that it's not just me. If I felt it was just me, I wouldn't be able to do it. But I feel that there's something like, why all of a sudden I keep waiting for someone else to translate the Bhagavad Gita and take out some of this violence and degradation of women. No one's doing it. Why? What are they afraid of? So I think that there's a saying in Sanskrit that has been my guiding light for many, many years. And it says, kas chit diraha, kas chit diraha. And what that means is very few are that courageous. And what they were referring to is even treading the spiritual path, because it's constant giving up. It's constant switching. Is this the right way to think? I used to think like this. Is this correct now? Or do I want to think like this? So bringing in a scripture that not only doesn't even mention women or barely mentions them, but then when they do, it demeans them, has to be changed. Because if it's going to be appreciated in the West, Western women are much more discriminating in that ability to be able to say, wait a minute, I don't care if this is 5,000 years old. It's antiquated thinking, and we have to honor everyone. If we honor everyone, there'll be a very different world that we're going to live in. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
It makes total sense to me. And I'm wondering on the flip side, so, it's very clear to me, and I'm sure to many people listening, that there are many elements of Bhagavad Gita that are somewhat outdated, and we could even say misogynistic. What would you say are the core teachings in the Gita that go beyond that? Like, where is the gold for those who are not familiar with the Gita and with the teachings in the Gita? What are the universal principles that go beyond gender and that we can look for beyond any of the misogyny that we might see?
I think where it excels, the Gita, is the ability to explain something that is a difficult concept for Westerners, and that's Dharma. I don't think we really understand Dharma, and it does such a brilliant way of explaining Dharma and the ability to know where we fit in this universe and what are our duties. What am I supposed to be doing while I'm here? Am I supposed to be sitting and meditating all day? Or is that not my Dharma? Maybe I'm supposed to be a merchant, or as we're seeing with Arjuna, he's saying you're a warrior, you're a kshatriya. Get up and fight. That's your duty. But there's something in him that can't. So I think the Dharma, and also the way they describe, one of my favorite aspects is the transmigration of the soul. And I think this explains the idea of, to use a song from a line from a song, we've all been here before, and we've all done things. And if we understand the transmigration of the soul, I think Dharma is easier to understand also. Why are we here? Like when you say to me, I was brave, I don't feel that. I just feel like I put one foot in front of the other, and this is where it led me, because that's my Dharma to do that. Why? I can't tell you why a Western woman is making translations of the Gita and the sutras. I can't tell you that reason. All I know is something that was presented, it happened, I did it, and people responded positively. So this is what I think the Gita allows us to understand, that we're all here for a reason, and different reasons. If you're a yoga teacher, you're here because in the past, you have done enough practices to allow you to get to the point you can become a teacher to show the way to other people. That's all Dharma. It's all Dharma. It just doesn't happen. You just don't take someone off the street and make them a teacher without some kind of past in that. So I think that's where the Gita really shines. Also, I think one of the things, if you'll allow me, is I just wanted to mention the two books that we're talking about, the sutras and the Gita, are very different books, very different. The sutras presuppose a spiritual awakening in some level. And it is written for people who that's what their life is. That's their Dharma. That's all they do. Whereas the Gita was written specifically for the merchant and the warrior caste, to begin to bring them into the spirituality because their focus wasn't there. So when we look at the Gita, there's explanations in it that are far superior to the Yoga Sutras because they're talking to a different group of people. In the sutras, they're assuming that you already know these things. The Gita is not. Yeah. And remember, the Gita is just a one conversation in this huge poem, the biggest poem in the world, the longest one of the Mahabharata, which is even more violent and more, there's one thing also that I don't think people understand if they haven't read the Mahabharata or just the Gita. At the end of the Mahabharata, the women finally get their say. I don't know if people understand this, but they are, and excuse me, pissed. They have lost their husbands, their brothers, their fathers, their friends. There's no one to take care of them because they don't work. The whole society has been changed by this war. So I don't think that it needs to be in a negative. We can bring the Gita into the light and expose those glorious teachings. That's how I feel.
Thank you. I wanted to touch on the idea of Dharma that you were just speaking about, because it's a question that people ask me a lot, how do I figure out what my Dharma is, or I don't know what my Dharma is. And what I've come to realize over the years is that usually your Dharma is the thing that you're doing anyway, that you didn't kind of think was anything special, but to someone looking from the outside, there's that Beatles song, John Lennon says, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And I kind of feel like that's Dharma, like when I'm looking at you from the outside, I'm like, oh, this courageous woman that's doing this amazing work, and you're like, well, it just is like my natural way. And I know that I get that a lot because I have 5 children, and so I often have this people say to me, oh my goodness, 5 children, how do you do it? Like, it's amazing, it's incredible. And I really struggle to answer that question, because the truth is I just do it. Like, it's just my life, and I don't even know how I do it. It's just, I can't imagine any other way. So it's obviously a big part of my Dharma is to be a mother and to take care of these 5 humans. But I feel like it's, we sometimes get a little bit stuck in this, like, I have to figure it out what it is, like, what is my purpose? And actually, a lot of the teachings of the Gita point to the idea that it's almost your natural state. Would you agree with that, Nischala?
First of all, I think it's amazing you have 5 children. I can't even imagine. I have 1 plant and it's hard enough to take care of. I think that the concept has to be shaken out a little bit, because there's 2 words involved. We have Dharma and we have Swadharma. So we have 2 aspects of Dharma. So Dharma would be considered the righteous path, the way that you would tread through the world in order to fulfill what you came in to do, if that makes sense. Not the best English, but I think you can kind of go with me on that. So we have the big Dharma, which generally there has to be a certain level of spiritual consciousness to even understand that you have Dharma, that Dharma is even there. So Dharma is a little bit lifted out of the ordinary, in that you're looking at a spiritual map, but you may not have the key yet to understand it. You may not be evolved enough. It's a little bit like, and it's nothing, I'm just using it as a comparison, but astrology. If I look at an astrology chart, I have no idea what I'm reading, what I'm looking at. But someone who's an astrologer would understand it. Oh, yes, this is here and this is why it's doing this. But for me, I wouldn't understand it. It's a little bit like that with Dharma. There has to be a consciousness that is expanded enough to understand what is happening and why. and what your part is in it. Are you an active part? Are you a passive part? What do you do? How do you work with that? What I think you're getting at, and I think is most relevant to most of us, is what we call the swadharma. And the swadharma is our individual dharma, what we are actually doing, having 5 children, writing books, being an accountant, whatever that is, we're doing this dharma, but it's not necessarily affecting the big dharma. I mean, in certain ways, everything affects it. So this is our individual, and the belief is if we get our swadharma right, and we do it in a righteous way and in a good way, that we will be, the full dharma will be revealed to us. Does that confuse or make more sense? I never know.
It makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
And we'll open up to questions shortly, and then we can ask everyone if they want some clarification. But I just have 2 more questions for you myself before we do that. Just 2 for now.
So does that make sense with dharma and swadharma? Okay.
Yeah, and it's sort of almost like I sort of sometimes have this image of like, it's like the lens through which we're seeing something, like we can kind of zoom out almost like a drone and kind of look at our lives from this very big picture perspective. But then we also have capacity to like zoom in and look very closely and sort of look at the micro and the detail. And I feel like if we can do both, then we can come some of the way to really, that helps me to understand what you've just said.
Also, the lens has to be clean.
Sure.
That's the important, that's the practices. That's what the practices do. Because even if you zoom in and zoom out, sometimes it's fuzzy. That's what the practices do, they keep it. So the more practices, spiritual practices that the deep, let me clarify, the deeper practices that we do, the clearer the dharma and the swadharma become. Yeah. And then the adjustments come. You say, wait a minute, maybe this isn't right. I shouldn't do it in this particular way. This is the way. It's like, how do I approach the Gita, right? How do I approach the sutras? So there was another question you had asked for, which I thought maybe you're going to ask that question now. You sent me some thing, and you were talking about women and how they do the practices. I think we got a little confused there. When I'm talking about the tactile, I'm talking about the practices. And I think women need to feel the practices. Am I right? I can see all of you. Am I right? We want to feel it. We want to viscerally feel it in our bodies. And that's why when we go toward something like that, that's what I was talking about. So I agree with you with the action, but there's also the feeling. And that's why I broke from tradition with the secret power, and I put practices in after each chapter, and sometimes after each sutra, because I know women, and I know we need to feel what that feels like. So that was my clarification of that. Yeah.
Actually, I have a tangential question now, that because something I've noticed you've said a couple of times, you just spoke about in our own sadhana having the capacity to modify or to alter depending on whether it's working or not working. And you spoke before about the idea of being able to change our minds, to see something one way and then see it differently. And something I've noticed, and this actually really relates to the political climate at the moment, particularly the Trump election, I think it's very relevant, is that seems to me at the moment in the world, even more than ever before, a tendency to polarizing opinions and being very dogmatic, and people feeling very unable to change their minds or to see nuance. It's almost like we have to position ourselves, and then we have to defend and hold on to that position, rather than have an attitude of exploration or investigation or curiosity, or even be willing to say, well, I used to think this and now I don't think that anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, well, I wonder what you think about that. Has that been your observation also?
You know, I've never seen a political climate like this ever in my life. In the United States, I've seen it in communist countries and other places. I think that I think the underlying in all this is fear. I think people are afraid, and most people are afraid of change. And that's really a no-win because change is inevitable. That's what it is. Nature changes constantly, and the ability to want to keep things the same or even go back just doesn't work. So when we're in our little bubbles and we're here with yogis and everything is fine and we're all smiling and trying to be happy with who we are, it's very different than when you meet someone who is aggressive, is set on taking people back, on doing things that are not in compliance with 2024. You know, we're in we should be developing instead of going backwards. We should be going forwards with our socialization, with our acceptance of people who are different. How many years does this have to go on before we can recognize that someone's different and we're okay with that? We're not all the same. So it comes from complacency, but also fear. There's a strong fear. And when I didn't watch the whole Returns because it was too painful, but when I started to see how I describe it as the hemorrhaging of America, as the red wave went through it, it looked to me like a hemorrhage. And I thought to myself, people are scared. That was my first thing. And I realized when you know who you are, when you continually do deep spiritual practices, not just go in and pray because someone tells you to, but really deep practices, you know who you are. The fear is not as present. And you also know who everybody else is. That's the thing about practices, about spiritual tradition. It's not just you that's elevated, everybody gets elevated. So I think that we've missed because we're not breeding spirituality in our societies. We may be casting aside religion, but we're not bringing anything in to replace that deep sense of belonging and connectivity that I think some of the religions have failed us. And we have to recreate a situation that brings it back. Yeah. And this is a very scary time for a lot of people. And their basic freedoms are being taken away. And when that happens, more fear comes. And
it becomes a kind of self-perpetuating cycle. Yeah.
To have a spiritual leader shows that the country is in Dharma, right? And they're not. Yeah. And there have been some spiritual leaders, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, right? Martin Luther King. These were people who knew who they were and followed their Dharma, getting back to the word Dharma. They didn't know what they were doing, most of them. They just did it because that's the next thing to do. Yeah. Sorry, I'm very passionate right now because this is really real. It's pressing right down on us right now. Yeah. It's not something that's theory or going to happen. It's now. Yeah. And I think
we feel it very strongly even here in Australia.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not our government, but it impacts the whole world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the only way out is in.
Well, that was going to be my next question, like what in terms of sort of activism or response or next steps for us as spiritual people, what is your advice?
Well, I think it depends on your capacity. Like you said, not everybody's brave. Not everybody can go out and fight. And not everybody should fight. I don't want to fight because it disturbs me if I fight. The only thing I know how to do is go inside and pray and try to be kind to the person next to me. I think it starts there. That, I remember a very beautiful story about Mother Teresa. One of her nuns was very, very ill, bedridden, actually, not able to move around. And we all know about her nuns, how active they were, and they were constantly moving around and helping people from early morning till night, jobs that other people didn't want to do. So this woman was laying in bed, and she decided it probably wasn't time for her to live anymore because she was being useless. She was just eating the food, drinking the drinks, and not serving. So Mother Teresa heard of this, and she went and she visited the nun, and she said, I heard this. Is this true? And the woman said, yes. She said, I'm not doing anything. I'm not serving anymore. I'm just taking up space. And Mother Teresa looked at her and she said, what are you doing when you when you lie here all day? She said, well, I pray. And she said, what do you pray? She said, I pray that you and the other nuns have the strength and health to continue to serve. And Mother Teresa looked at her and she said, it's because of you that we're able to serve. So I don't think we should underestimate the power of prayer. Good thoughts, if you don't want to do prayer, say good thoughts, whatever it is. Anytime the mind goes into negative, switch it. Because you can't afford the luxury of a negative thought, and the world can't afford it either. Every time we have a negative thought like that, something changes our chemistry, our physiology changes. So to continually have these bad thoughts, it doesn't help anybody. And I think the deeper the practices, the more profound they are on ourselves and in other people. It works. I mean, even TM did this in Washington, D.C. The police asked them to come. There was so much crime. If you could meditate twice a day here, let's see if the crime goes down. And it did. So don't underestimate your individual power in all this. I think we can change the world. I know we can. We have to.
You're reminding me of the argument that people often give about vegetarianism, where they say, well, there's no point you being vegetarian because, everyone else is still eating meat and it doesn't make any difference. And I always think about that and I think, well, it makes a difference to the individual cow or fish
Sure
or
does.
whatever it is that I didn't eat today. So
Sure does.
it might be a small contribution, but it's still a contribution.
Yep. I don't think, and people are vegetarian for different reasons, one of them which you're talking about, but it's also, again, an individual thing. It's not that someone should say to somebody, be vegetarian. You look at this and you think, do I need to kill this to live? Or can I live without eating that? We see what it does to the body, to the heart. Why would it affect the heart? Because the heart is the most sensitive organ we have, and killing affects it. Cholesterol, there you go. So people will argue with you constantly about anything you say. I see that all the time. It doesn't make them right and you wrong. It's just they're trying to convince themselves as much as they're trying to convince you. And I just sit there and smile. That's all I do. I don't even engage. And they say to me, aren't you going to say something? I said, nothing to say, nowhere to go. It's your choice. But you don't have a right to tell me what I eat. I'm going to eat what I want. So it's difficult because we are definitely the minority in this world, a very small minority. And how will we act? How will we live? That's the question. I always say to people, they say to me, well, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I want to do this. I said, it's all fine. Just let me know how you feel at night when you close your eyes and you have that short period, hopefully short period, between waking and sleeping. What comes up? And if sweet things don't come up, look at your life. Look at your life. Adjust it. See how it goes. Because we're all trying to understand why we're here, and we can't. So we're doing all kinds of things to distract ourselves in the meantime. Yeah. Does that make sense? Sort of. Yeah. I'm hoping Australia was going to be sweet and let some Americans in at this point. All of a sudden,
we're not very good at letting anybody in, I'm afraid.
You're not letting anybody in?
No, it's a big failing of Australia overall. We're not very good at that whatsoever. Let's open up to questions. Anything anyone wants to ask on the topic that we've been discussing so far. Shay's jumping in straight away.
Thank you so much. I wanted to go back to what you were saying at the very beginning, Nischala, about the words righteousness and war and violence not going together. And then picking up on what you've said about how so many people are having their basic rights, taken away and abused. And so for those who that's happening to, those who are most vulnerable, most marginalized, what is the way to resist? Or what is the way to move out of that oppression?
That's an amazing question. I wish I knew the answer to it. I really don't. The first thing that came to me is how you describe them. I think that's what we're here for. I think those are that are strong, whether mentally, spiritually, physically, otherwise, are there to give a hand up to people. And I think for me, getting back to the awful subject of the election, that's what it was about. For me, it wasn't really going to affect me personally, right? I have healthcare. I have money. I have the ability to go out and buy healthy food, get a place to live. It's not affecting me, but that doesn't mean I don't care, because that which is done to the least of my sisters is done to me also. And that's what spirituality does. And that's why a lot of people drop out, because it makes you so sensitive to other people's sufferings that you can't ignore it. So you march with people. You go out and you sign petitions, whatever you can do. See, what I'm predicting, and we can revisit this in a few years and see if I'm right, is, because I've seen this before, is there's going to be a strong underground that's going to come up. And people are going to go underground, but they're going to start helping each other. This happened during slavery. They had the Underground Railroad. This happened during the Vietnam War. All these things start happening because there's people like us that cannot stand by and watch other people suffer when we know there's something that can be done about it. So to go into a homeless shelter and tell them to meditate, I don't think is practical. To go into a homeless shelter and help them get food, that's practical, right? So, with the food, and I quote the Bible on this, one cannot live by bread alone, but by every word of God. Because with that, not that you have to preach to them, they've got enough preaching, they've heard enough. Your example of kindness is what will show them their spirituality, because you will reflect it back to them. And regardless of how poor they are, how lonely they are, whatever it is, you're going to remind them that they're also a child of God, just like everybody else. I think that's the only thing that we can do, other than going in and working in a homeless shelter, et cetera, et cetera. But on a larger scale, let someone know that you care. Let them know that you mean someone out there knows what I'm going through and can help, or at least commiserate with me. So and if you can say anything else, I'm open. But I personally am frustrated also, because I want to go out there and make a difference. But I think we have to make a difference, like we were talking about a moment ago, one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. To that person, it made a difference. And that's how I see it. I don't think we have a magic wand that we can get rid of this man at this point. God knows somebody tried a couple times and didn't do it. So there's a lesson we have to learn in this. I don't know what it is yet. But I think one of the things is the more we open our hearts to other people, the more quickly the world will change back to a place we want to live in it again. I don't know. Check back in a couple of years. Let's see if I'm right or not. Yeah.
I think, if I may add a thought to what you just said,
Of course.
one of the things I notice happening as people feel scared, and you spoke about this climate of fear before, and I think it's something that many people, yogis and non-yogis are feeling. And sometimes what happens when we feel scared or we feel fear is we go into a sort of self-protection mode where it's very much about me and my immediate concerns, my home, my family, my finances, whatever it might be. And for me, in my own spiritual practice, something I notice I really try to challenge myself on is like, how can I continue in the face of fear and in the face of the world's collective troubles, continue to stay open-hearted, continue to speak up, continue to be courageous enough to, for example, I just give you a very simple example that Shay and I right now are working on the Bhakti Women's Summit for next year, which we're very fortunate Nischala will come and speak for us. And we've chosen that the theme of the summit is spiritual activism. Now, there's a part of me, if I'm being completely honest with you, that's like, it's a big subject right now. Like, we could have just done something nice and easy. We could have just gone, and done something.
There's no fun in that.
Right. So now we're like really we're inviting speakers and we're talking about like really serious subjects, and we're inviting controversy. And I know that there will be voices in the summit that disagree or are very elevated in their thinking, whatever. And then for me personally, the way that I think about that is like, this is my opportunity to make my contribution by being brave enough to create a forum, strongly encouraged by Shay, I have to say. I don't know if I'd be doing it on my own, where these conversations happen and where we're willing to, where I'm willing to stick my neck out and have opinions, and people may not agree, and it could create controversy, and and in each different way. Even we're talking about the homelessness, it's always shocking to me. Where I live here in Sydney, there's a lot of homelessness, and when I walk around with my kids, very often we give some food or we give some money, and the kids have gotten to know the various different eccentric characters that live in our neighborhood. And I'm often surprised by how many people just walk past head down, and just like, and it's not lack of caring, it's fear. It's like, well, this person looks a little scary or is a little eccentric. And I've really tried to teach my children, I do teach my children, that just because someone's a little different or behaving in a way that might be a little, erratic or eccentric, we can still be compassionate, we can still be kind, we can still be human. And part of that is overcoming our fears, on an individual and a collective level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When we look at someone, well, and I worked in medicine for many, many years. Probably most of you know that. And I saw that a lot, especially with the cancer patients. People would be afraid of them. And I would ask them sometimes, why are you afraid of them? I don't want to think of me getting it. I said, but you're not getting it. Somebody else has it, and you're trying to help and take a little bit of the pain away. They were so fixated. And it was interesting, even at our ashram, I remember the first cancer program we did was a little bit away from the main campus. And somebody came up to me, a few people came up to me and they said, "You're not going to let them eat here with us, are you?" And I said, "Yeah, why not? What do you mean them? First of all, who's them?" And they said, I said, why? Why are you concerned? They said, well, maybe it's contagious. And I would just look at them and I say, I'm in with them 24/7. If it was contagious, do you think I would do that? I'm in bed with them, I'm holding them, I'm hugging them, I'm touching them. I said, your fear, if anything, if you get it, it might be from your fear, but not from these people. So I think it's the same kind of thing. We hear stories, at least in the United States, these people had good jobs. Some of them still do. They're still living in their car. A lot of it's because of healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. But this fear of people being different than us seems to be creating chaos in the world. And by keeping, and sorry, getting back to politics a little bit, but keeping immigrants out makes that even stronger. You have to see people who are different than you, that have a different skin color, that have a different hair color, that have a different body shape, that speak a different language, that eat all kinds of different foods. Otherwise, what happens is this fear continues because they're other. And no, they're just like us. They are us. And that's what I think happens. The more spiritual practice you go, I don't know if your mother did this, but my mother always, when we passed somebody like that, who was an unfortunate situation, she would always say to me, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Right? And this, since I was little girl, she would always say this. So I learned not to fear them, but to almost pity them in a way. And then when I got older and I started doing practices, the whole phrase changed for me. It was no longer there, but for the grace of God go I. It was there go I, right? You're not different than them. Your situation is different. Your circumstances are different. Your lifestyle is different. But they want the same thing that you want. They want their children to be happy and safe and healthy. They want to have a nice place to live. They want to have good food. Everybody wants the same thing. It's just circumstances. And if your circumstances are such that you're able to help them and you don't, that's back to the Bhagavad Gita. That's back to the Gita. Because you have to see people as yourself. And that's what spirituality does. So the fact that you're exposing your children to this, I would just applaud you, because that's where they have to learn, as in childhood. Because if they don't learn it then, by the time we get to being adults, we're way too selfish to change that around most of the time. So children need to know that. And if you show children, look, he's a nice person, he just looks a little strange. That's all. He didn't have a bathtub like you did. He didn't get mommy to wash their hair like you did. Maybe if he had somebody, he wouldn't look like that. So if we normalize it, I think other people do too. Yeah. Does that make sense? I don't know. Yeah. It's a
We have
difficult world.
we have just a few more moments left. Somebody in the chat wrote something I thought was very interesting. She said a lot of people are struggling themselves emotionally, and to offer support is to be vulnerable. Many feel they don't have capacity for this. I mean, one thing I've noticed in my own life is that when I feel that I am struggling and I feel that I don't have capacity, if I can find it within myself to step up and be of service to others,
Yes.
often my capacity expands.
Yes.
So I think even the concept of self-care can sometimes be quite dangerous, because we talk about self-care, but actually there's a very fine line between self-care and selfish, where we get very caught up in our own needs. And what I observe in my life is that when I'm able to be in service of others, it often is regenerative of my own energy. Do you have any thoughts to add to that around the sort of, it's about capacity?
I think you just said something very profound, and that's what happens with a lot of people. They mistake self-care for selfishness. And to me, you do enough to get yourself to the place that you can serve, and then you recharge. It's like well, they're not new, but the rechargeable cars, right? If you don't recharge the battery, you can't drive the next day. It's very simple. So, but you're charging the battery so you can go somewhere, so you can serve others. And I think this is a very, very important thing that, and I can see it in different people. You know, some people will let you in on the freeway. Some people will say no, they'll pull up right in front of you. What has happened to us? Why are we so selfish? We never used to be like that. We've gotten worse. As we've gotten more, we're more greedy and we're more selfish. So I think the important thing, and this is something the Gita talks about all the time, karma yoga, service, seva. The best thing to do, serve others. You're feeling sad, you're feeling depressed, you're feeling unhappy, go serve. And you know, well, you don't have Thanksgiving, but we have Christmas coming up, right? Go serve somebody. Go bring food to someone who doesn't have a family, who can't get out. Do that. Not only will they be happy, your whole life will change. It makes us happy. Louise had was that a hand or just a heart?
I think Louise has a good question that we can end out on. I did just want to share very quickly something on that I just thought of now. Some of you've heard me mention this before, but when I had my first child, my mother came over. She lives in England, and she came over to stay with us for a few weeks because I had just had my first baby. And we were living with my in-laws at the time. So my mother-in-law was also there. And it was such a profound difference in my mother's attitude and my mother-in-law's attitude to the baby. So my mother, if I asked my mother to, for example, hold the baby or look after the baby while I had a shower or while I did something, her attitude was one of like, she was doing me a favor. She would be like, yes, I can, but then I want to do my thing. Or, like it was kind of an inconvenience to her. And I felt like I was burdening her with the baby. Whereas my mother-in-law literally would thank me for letting her look after the baby. She would say to me, thank you so much for trusting me. Wow. With my grandson, or thank you so much for giving me this precious time. Wow. And it was such a profound difference. And it really has completely informed my path as a parent now. My mother-in-law's passed away, but I remind myself the great privilege and the great blessing I have to look after my children and to have my children, versus the narrative that's very common in our culture of like, oh, children are such hard work. Oh my goodness, it's so difficult. It's like, what a privilege to be a mother and to look after these holy beings. How wonderful that I have this opportunity.
And what is it? It's just attitude, right?
It's just the mind. It's just the mind. It's all it is. It's like you said before, just changing the way that you see the thing.
Mind as healer or mind as slayer. That's our choices.
Yeah.
It can go with us or against us. And best to have the reins of the mind in your hand, that you can control it. That's what, again, the message of the Gita. Control that mind, because otherwise it's going to drag you all over the place. Good for you for seeing that and acting on it. Did you ever talk to your mom about it?
Well, it's really the way that I was raised, like, and it's not my mum, it's the whole generation, and it's like the whole kind of culture. Like the first wave of feminism was very much about women have been put upon and now we're over it kind of thing. So, she had children, but it was kind of like we were basically quite inconvenient. I mean, she's a loving mother. It wasn't like she's a perfectly good mother, but the attitude is one of like, I'm the priority and the kids are kind of like, they just have to fit in with me. And I think that was very much not very normal for that generation. But my mother-in-law is Greek, and she comes from a more traditional, like less Western influence, more traditional, like she's from a village and much more family oriented. And so it's just a different approach. I remember that the first time she thanked me, I was literally misunderstood. I was like, I don't want, like, you're thanking me. And then I kind of got it. And it was such a powerful teaching for me. We're out of time, and just as
Oh,
we've run out of time, all the questions have come piling in thick and fast, but we, to be continued. We will have other opportunities, but I would love to just end with Louise's question, because I do think it's a good juicy one to finish with. She says,
okay.
Nischala, I would love to hear your thoughts about outcomes not being our business. This is such a big theme in the Bhagavad Gita, the idea of expectation and effort. So non-attachment to the outcomes of our effort, I guess.
Yeah. You are entitled to the fruits. You are entitled to do the action, but not to the fruits. And that's, again, another central theme in the Bhagavad Gita. And I don't think we actually know what that means, most of us. We think that we just walk away, but we gain, but we don't understand that it's gaining on a very subtle level. That by doing some good to others, the entire humanity raises up a notch. And we have to understand that just because we do something good, it may not change anything, and it may not even get counted. That's not why we do it. We do it because we have no choice. We see a problem, we see a person that's hurting, and you just go over to them. That's it. You don't think, you don't rationalize, you don't say, oh, is this going to be good? Is this not going to be good? You just do it. And that's, I think, the purity of heart when it comes. It overrides, it overrides the mind. So the mind is saying, don't go over to that homeless person. They may have to, but the heart says, wait a minute, they're human. When was the last time anybody said anything kind to them? So we have this heart and mind going back and forth, but what the spiritual practices do is strengthen the message from the heart and allow the mind to step back, because the mind will be that selfish one. The mind will be the one that says, oh, so what? I had hard times too. I never went to that, right? We're so quick to judge. Instead of what the native people say, walk a mile in their moccasins. See how it really feels to be in that situation. So we have a long way to go, but we're on the path. That's the good news. We're walking it. And this is a particularly difficult time, I think, with the wars going on, with the elections, with people being elected that are not nice people and not doing good things for people. But yet we go in and we sit and we meditate and we pray, and some shake in the force happens. Some shake in the force. And if enough of us do it, something will happen. But even then, remember, when you close your eyes at night, are you okay with what you did during the day? If not, don't repeat it the next day. Don't be down on yourself. Don't badger, get all upset. Just don't do it again. Do something different and see how that works. And I think that's the way of women. That's the way of mothers. If one thing doesn't work, the baby won't stop crying now, you do something else. If they won't stop because you're in the rocking chair, you get up and walk. If that doesn't help, you put them in the car. We keep trying different things, and we don't get down on ourselves when the thing we just tried doesn't work. To me, that's the real secret of spirituality. And that's what the Gita tells us too. Be brave. Go out and do it. And I think the other part, if I can just say, is make sure you don't hurt anybody, even those that hurt you. Don't hurt them, because you're perpetuating violence that way. Yeah. So it's difficult time. And I thank you for allowing me to come on and speak to all of you. And we're all doing the best we can. That's all we can do. That's all we can do. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your precious insights and for your time. And if we don't see you again, we will see you for the summit, which is happening in February. We're really looking forward to that. So we'll get to continue the conversation.
I look forward to it. And remember, this too shall pass. And when it does, it uncovers joy. Don't forget that. Yeah, it's in our hearts. Thank you all.
Nischala. Thank you everyone for being here. Have a beautiful day. Namaste.
Namaste.